Originally, the plan was to talk about the changes specifically made to the Mini Splatling and how I felt about them, but as the last few days have gone by with 1.4 being out, I've been seeing a lot of talk about other weapons being more prevalent than ever before, so I decided to change today's video from talking about the Mini Splatling to talking about the weapons that have seemed to have popped up now that Baller is seemingly irrelevant now. So that's what today's video will be on, the weapons that have become more prevalent than before, and how I feel about them. So let's get started. First off, I want to talk about the Mini Splatling, as this was something that I really wanted to talk about originally, and that's what this video was supposed to be about. The mobility changes to it were a big deal. The Mini Splatling in the first game had high mobility, and that's what it played off of. But between games, they decided to lower its base mobility and lower the effects of run speed on it, probably because of how prevalent it was before. 1.4 brought a 20% buff to the run speed when using run speed up, and in my 1.4 patch note video, I did mention how I don't feel like it's going to be that big of a change, because I mentioned it as 20% of a low number is still a low number, and that is sort of true. I did mess with a bunch of run speed on it. I used upwards about like 5 mains, because that's all my gear would allow me to use at this point, as I don't really build for run speed. And it didn't really seem to do that much. You're never going to hit Splatoon 1 level of mobility anymore. I feel like they're going to, put a hard stop on that happening again. But the changes to its base mobility and then having run speed up actually do something to it has made run speed at least somewhat of an option for it. Before, I never used run speed on the Mini because I felt that the difference was so negligible that it just wasn't worth using, and I was much better off using a bunch of other stuff, like special charge, ink recovery, swim speed, and so on. So that's what I used instead of run speed. But now, because of the changes, I feel at least a pure of run speed is about the most ideal, at least for me. Other people are going to say they want to use more, that's fine. But looking at the difference between the patches, I've noticed that 1.4 is basically the equivalent of running one main of run speed before the patch, and then adding onto that is basically whatever you would do prior in 1.3, adding run speed. So I just feel up here at this point is the biggest difference, and adding any more is just minuscule and not worth running. No pun intended. And while the changes to the Mini didn't exactly make it very prevalent, the changes to this weapon made it appear pretty often, and that's the Splat brella. This weapon was actually pretty sped up between shots and pulling out the shield, and then the individual shots doing slightly more damage than they did before. This weapon has become pretty prevalent, and it's hard to go a solo match or even a league match without seeing at least one. And I can tell you, even Japan is using them, as I've played quite a few Japanese Splat brellas. And it's actually a really good weapon. I didn't expect that I would like playing this weapon. When it came out, I did feel it was a little slow. Like a lot of people, I felt that it just wasn't too much. It just didn't feel good. Like shooting and then having to wait so long to pull out the shield made it easy for you to be punished rather than you should be the punisher. Now that's the case. It feels so fast pulling out the shield and shooting between it, and now I feel like this is a really good weapon. It is very good in the hands of people that know how to exploit the end lag on other weapons and, fire between shots. So basically, look at it like this. If I'm shooting at a Splat roller, I would want to pull up the shield every time he starts the flick, and then I will drop the shield and shoot at him every time he's done with his flick, because he has that end lag where he can't fire again, yet I can take advantage of that opening. It's a weapon that does a great job at that. And it can still exploit shooters that have the rapid fire or whatever, but the window is different. And in fact, 1.4 kind of introduced a little bit of an exploit for the brella, and that was what the 1.4.1 patch came out for. The brella, because you could pull out the shield and drop it so fast, there were times where you could appear as not dropping the shield on other players' screens. So to other players, it'll look like your shield is always up and you're firing out of your shield. This was a bit of an annoying exploit, as it made it to where you would always be blocking, but you could also always do damage. Now, of course, it didn't appear like this on your screen. There's no way that it would be fast enough for that to happen, but it was simply a result of the netcode not being able to update that information fast enough. So 1.4.1 added was a patch that adjusted that and made it to where that didn't happen anymore, which didn't hurt it at all to me, honestly. People have been going around saying it, and I honestly believe it. The Splat brella has become a legitimate pick now. It is now what I would consider to be a mid to high tier pick in this game, especially for Splat zones. Its kit is very good for it, and even Inkstorm itself was buffed, so it now lasts a little bit longer. So if you want to run some special power up, it'll even last longer than that. It's just an overall good weapon, and I've actually found myself really enjoying playing it. So I guess I could say expect to see more from it, not just from me, but pretty much everywhere you go, you'll probably see a couple of them. And I honestly, I'm fine with that. And surprisingly, one weapon that has appeared pretty often and people are now backing, even though its changes weren't all that big, is the Dapple dualies, which are basically the short-range dualies. The change to this weapon was its end lag after dashing was lowered slightly, along with all the other base dualies. So it doesn't seem like it'd be that big of a deal, but as something that is lightweight like it and has a high mobility and has quick dashes, removing a bit of that end lag actually really helps it. So now you have less time to worry about being stuck and you can focus more on your mobility and coverage. And more people have started to use it as the special that it has, Suction Bomb Rush, is something that hasn't really been seen all that often and is actually a really good tool for coverage. It's mostly hasn't been seen because weapons don't really have this kind of special. It's not everywhere. It's not on many weapons. And then what makes the Dapples really good is how quick they are and how easy it is for them to exploit people's lack of aiming, I guess. People are still trying to get used to the motion controls, and there's still players out there that haven't quite gotten a grip on it, or there's the people out there that are using stick controls, and having something like the Dapple that it can quickly move around and get closer to people and like dash to the left or to the right of them, it makes it to where unless you have fast reflexes and your aim is still good, you're more likely to lose the 1v1. And that's pretty interesting to see. I haven't seen all that many of them, but I have seen a lot of talk about the weapon being used more often, and I can certainly understand it. Beacons are definitely good on some maps, and Suction Bomb Rush is something that's almost always good, though probably not for something like Tower Control. For Zones and Rainmaker, it's actually relatively decent, so the kit all around is pretty decent, and I can sort of understand the use of the Dapples. I'm not really too much of a fan of the weapon myself. However, it is something that has been popping up pretty recently and has been brought up in several discussions about the weapons that have become more useful with these changes. And then the weapon that a bunch of people have kind of expected to come out of nowhere and start being used more often is the Splattershot Pro. This thing got several buffs, mostly regarding its accuracy and its velocity. So now the weapon is almost, I'd say not pinpoint accurate, but it is relatively accurate. And though the weapon didn't have all that much accuracy problems before, now it just makes it to where this thing, if you have good aim, you're more often than not going to always land shots, and your 3 shots are always going to land. And then they made it to where if you're jumping, the 3 shots are also always likely to land if your reticle is on them. They just buffed this thing's accuracy a lot, and it now is probably one of the more accurate long-range shooters, with the Jet Squelcher probably being the most accurate long-range shooter. And that just makes it really good. It's like a mid to long-range shooter that is now more accurate than it has been before. The velocity of the shots have been sped up, so now its travel speed is even faster, making it to where the distance between players is less relevant than it has been before. So it's become a very good shooter. A lot of long-range weapons in this game have sort of suffered as map design hasn't exactly favored them, their kits haven't exactly favored them, and the weapons themselves haven't actually, transitioned very well. The 96 Gal was probably one of the better long-range shooters at the start of the game because of ink armor output, but now that ink armor output isn't exactly vital anymore, their long range has sort of died off. The longest range you would see before were probably Chargers, and then the occasional 96 popping back up. So this is a really good thing for long-range players. This is something that's sort of needed, as long-range weapons sort of just aren't, well, they weren't needed. They just weren't, there was no reason to play them. A lot of them just didn't have anything good going for them anymore, and it was something that needed to be changed. And though we don't have everything, so we can't quite say that long range was always going to be bad, it's just something that sort of needed to be handled now. Otherwise, everything would have been stuck to mid to short range, and then the people that wanted to play back and play long range weapons like the pro weren't gonna get anything, or they could just sit there and try and play it and then lose out to something that can travel faster or can move faster than them. When that shouldn't be the case, they should always have some form of ground as a long range shooter. So all the changes made to it were very good, and I see a lot of people playing it. I see it popping up very often now, and I've seen a lot of people praising the changes that it got, and a lot of people playing it more often. And I can understand it. I played the pro a bit in the first game, and I haven't really played it at all this game, but I am a big fan of the weapon. I do like it. The kit is okay. I've always defended point sensors as a sub, but not a lot of people are fans of them. And then Inkstorm being buffed also helped the original Splattershot Pro, along with point sensors being buffed as well. So I would say that this is a good pick now if you want to play long range, and is probably one of the better long range weapons now. And finally, I want to talk about the weapon that just came out, and that is the Range Blaster. Now, this was something that was very, very powerful in the first game, and depending on how you want to look at it, it was a high tier weapon. The custom range blaster in the first game had Splat Bomb and Kraken, and then on top of that had a light depletion Kraken, meaning where if it died it didn't lose as much of its special gauge as other weapons would. And so the CRB was a very common weapon in the first game. You couldn't go a match without seeing one because it was long ranged, it had a great kit, and it had very good killing power. So they released the Range Blaster back into Splatoon 2, and how does it fare? Well, it's essentially the same. Unlike the Mini Splatling, which did receive some nerfs between games due to usage, the custom range, or I guess I probably should just start calling it the Range Blaster, hasn't received any changes. It is essentially one-to-one with its part in Splatoon 1, and hasn't received changes. There might be some slight changes with ink consumption, because all the blasters have received ink consumption change. The weapon itself functions very similarly, and its kit right now is at least relatively decent. It has a bomb, and it has the newly buffed Inkstorm. But how does it fit? Like, how does it act in terms of other weapons? Well, it used to have a role in Splatoon 1 as basically the team's slayer. It would go out and just kill people from a distance. Well, prior to the Range Blaster coming out, I feel that the sloshing machine actually filled that sort of role. It was a mid to long range weapon that could pretty much securely just kill people by scraping them or directing them and then scraping them. And just about any point in the sloshing machine's hitbox could do damage. And then it had a high mobility, which was a change between games. And then its kit was also pretty good. So the sloshing machine basically at the early game replaced the Range Blaster's Slayer role, and it did it pretty well. The sloshing machine could also paint, which is something the Range Blaster could only really do by killing in the first game. You would see Range Blasters in the first game output Kraken so much because of their Splat Bomb and then coverage from killing people. So now the Range Blaster is back, so how does it fare in terms of the sloshing machine? Well, I've been seeing a lot of discussion regarding it, and I've seen that people have said that the Range Blaster is basically back where it is, and now its role as a Slayer sort of exists. It's not going to be as high tier of a Slayer as it was before, as it doesn't have Kraken anymore, but now it is basically back in its sort of role as a pressure weapon and a Slayer. And not to mention, it's also long range, which something I mentioned earlier has sort of been lacking. So it is definitely probably starting out at a mid to high tier pick already. And we don't even have the custom Range Blaster, which also has a really good kit. So I can definitely tell you, unfortunately, if you are not a fan of the Range Blaster in the first game being everywhere, chances are we'll be seeing it quite often in this game. And for those that are playing Sloshing Machine and feeling that they're probably going to be, replaced by Range Blasters, the Sloshing Machine still has its place. It is something that can cover better than the Range Blaster, and its kit is still pretty good in comparison. The Stingray is still a strong special now, and Auto Bomb is probably still in my opinion, one of the better subs. So it's not going to replace Slosher Machine. However, it's the Slayer role that a lot of people have been playing Machine for is probably going to be swapped out instead for Range Blaster. So that's pretty much it. Those are all the weapons that I've seen discussion about being regarded as more viable options. And I can say that I'm actually really happy with all these changes and to see all these weapons become more prevalent. I'm really enjoying playing the Brella. I really like the changes to the Mini. The Splattershot Pro changes benefit those that have been with that weapon since the first game and wanted to play long range. The Range Blaster is finally out for those that were able to play the Range Blaster in the first game and do very well with it. So all in all, this is a patch that did a lot of good, and it has changed the game's meta a lot. Before in 1.3, there was a lot of baller spam and a lot of splashdown spam because those two were very powerful with the changes they got. Now, because of 1.4, baller is still, while still existing, it isn't as prevalent as it was before, and it's unlikely that you'll see someone just playing to spam it, as it is now pretty easy to break with just about anything you use. And now the special variety has popped up. You'll see a lot more varying specials, with Inkstorm actually becoming one of the more used recently. And that's really good. I've actually really enjoyed the Inkstorm special since the start. However, it kind of suffered from being on not very many weapons to begin with. So now that more weapons that have Inkstorm are coming out, like the Range Blaster, and then the ones that already have it, like the Brella and the Pro, are getting buffs and changes to make it more playable, it is just making Inkstorm more prevalent. So all in all, I can say that the changes that 1.4 brought were very good, and the variety in the meta has changed a lot, and I'm really glad to see it, and I'm really interested to see where we go from here with the changes we'll see in the next patch and patches onward, along with the weapons that come out. So I want to thank everyone for watching. If you have any comments regarding what the meta feels like or these weapons, because I know it's not everyone plays competitive, or how you feel about these weapons, just leave a comment. I'll check back at it. We'll just see some discussions. We'll see how it goes, and I want to just know everyone's thoughts on these weapons, or if there was something that you felt is better now than it has been before. Please tell me that. I'd like to see it. So, once again, thanks everyone for watching, and I will see you all later.